Hey everybody, I've been so focused on managing the pests in my garden, I've forgotten to look at all of the good things. Well, not forgotten to look, but we've been busy with other things. But I just realized right now we have some beautiful tomatoes. And the other thing, I'm going to show you how I tie my tomatoes here in a minute. But I planted peas this year and I can't remember the packages inside of what variety these are, but look at these flowers. Like, I just have to show this to you. This is why we garden. Look at this gem. Oh, they are so pretty. These aren't the ones that I grew last year, but oh, here's a little baby pea. That's exciting. Oh my gosh, look at how beautiful these are. They are like absolutely stunning. Wow. They're gonna have to be full on tulip and tulip patrol. That garden gate is going to stay closed because they eat the peas. They eat the peas, they eat the beans. They come in and they help themselves. And if I'm not careful or I'm not mindful to close the gate behind me, I'll be working in here and suddenly I'll hear like crunching and they're both laying on the ground, kind of pulling peas and beans off the plants. So they are evicted as of today. So I came in here to show you the tomatoes and how I stake and prune and sucker all of my tomatoes for the biggest and best tomato harvest. Now, admittedly, this year I haven't been doing a good job. In fact, I've neglected them quite a bit, but we do have some tomatoes coming on, which is exciting. So I'll just show you some of the tips and tricks that I use to manage the tomatoes through the season to get the biggest harvest. But let me just show you some of the tomatoes that we already have on the vine here. So this is exciting. One of my favorite tomato varieties last year was the Midnight Snack. These are cherry tomatoes and we've already got some on the vine and they're black, which is really cool. So they are doing well. I can see that Brian has been in here already doing some suckering, but I'll pick a plant that has some good growth on it so that I can show you how I do it. But essentially you can see it on this plant. So I trim up the lower leaves as the plant grows, and essentially my rule of thumb is to not allow any of the foliage to touch the ground. So you can see this one here is touching the ground, so I'll come through and prune that off. When we grow tomatoes, these are kind of the rules by which we grow. So when we plant them, as you saw in a previous video, I can link that down below, we plant them deep. And this year I put some eggshells in the hole. And the calcium is to try to prevent blossom end rot, which is when kind of the tip or the bottom of the tomato goes black, and calcium helps with that. So hopefully that helped. And then as the tomatoes start to grow, they really do not like moisture, and that causes what's called blight, which causes the leaves to turn kind of yellow, develop yellow, then brown spots, and eventually wither and die. And that blight can stay in your soil. So we try not to put a lot of the blighty material into the compost. Normally we actually burn it. So to prevent blight from happening, because a lot of times it comes from splashback off of the soil surface when it rains. So we try not to let the tomatoes touch each other, but that's near impossible because I plant mine a little close. Like I plant them on 18 inches. But how we prevent the splashback from happening is that we trim off the lowest branches or the lowest limbs. I'm talking about it like it's a tree. The lowest plant parts that could potentially touch the soil. So as the plant gets bigger, we trim off the lower parts. So I'm just going to show you here what we do. The other thing we do is come through and sucker. So you're going to have, what you have is, this would be your main stem and then your lateral leaf that grows off the stem. And oftentimes right here in the union where the main stem meets that leaf, a little sprout will start, and those we remove. So when they're really small, you can just break them off by hand. But when they get bigger, I have a set of pruners here that I use. So I have two suckers. I'm going to show you here. This is one right here. Just move that little leaf out of the way so that you can see. So here is the leaf. Here is the main stem. This is the sucker. So the first thing I'm going to do is come in with my little pruners and prune that off. here is another sucker right here. So the main vine is here, and this is a sucker right here. So I'm going to prune that out. And that is all of the suckers that are on this plant that I can see. The next thing I want to do is remove any of the lower growing plant material that's touching the ground. So this lower limb here, I'm going to remove, or this lower leaf here, I'm going to remove. And if it's not touching, I don't remove it. So I literally wait until it touches. Or one of the other things I'll do is if it's touching another plant. So these two were touching, so I'm going to remove that. And that is good for today. So I've removed the suckers. So I've got one main vine, no suckers. And now you can see this plant is kind of leaning. And so what I want to do is trellis or to tie it up. And so to do that, I reach kind of as high up on the plant as I can. And I wrap, and all we use is rags. So when shirts or pillowcases or sheets or whatever become rag material or old, we'll rip it down into little strips. So I wrap the strip around the stem of the plant, cross it over, then I bring it around, and all we use is rebar stakes. Usually we get 8-foot rebar stakes because our tomatoes tend to grow about that tall, 6 to 8 feet. And you wrap it around on the back, underneath again, and then to the back again, and tie it off. Now you can do a bow tie, but we tie it off tight with two overhand knots. And that way, and see how it's up on an angle like this? That way the plant won't, that way the tie won't slide down the stake. And that is it. And so we do this about, I'm gonna say once a week, tying at least. I usually snip once a week or maybe every 2 weeks. It depends on how much rain we've had and how fast the plants are growing. And then at this time, I go in for kind of the final touches. So if you see right here, right at the growing tip, here is a little sucker. There's actually two. So right now I'll pinch those off, and it's really easy to sucker plants at this stage. Here's another one here. So this is the main stem. This is the lateral leaf. I just come in and I pull those off. And that's how it's done. There's a few developing on the back. That's the easiest time. So when they're really little, that's the best time to get those suckers. So that's how I sucker and stake my tomatoes. I've had a lot of really good success doing it this way for as long as I can remember now. I'm pretty sure I learned from my parents and Brian. I don't know. We kind of just started to do it and never stopped. Pretty sure that's what my parents used to do, is use rags. Anywho, yeah, it works really well. One of the other things that you can do, and I'm not very good at because I just don't like aborting flowers, is to take off any fasciated blossoms, which produce those tomatoes that have kind of the wonky bottom. I'm going to show you one here that's just developing, and I'll try and find a fasciated blossom, which you tend to get if you're planting heirloom tomatoes. So if you grow heirlooms, you're bound to get more fasciated blossoms, which is just multiple blossoms per like a dense flower. So let me see if I can find one here. Well, I can't find any fasciated blossoms, only because I'm really looking for it. But here is a tomato that's starting to grow that is a result of a fasciated. So you see that all that kind of what looks like scarring at the bottom of the tomato. That was because there were multiple blooms that were pollinated all at the same time that produce this funky looking tomato. So normally these tomatoes I take off and I feed to the chickens, or I put them in sauce or something like that. They often produce very large tomatoes. So, you know, if you're going for poundage, then leave those alone. But if you can spend time in your garden and catch those fasciated blossoms, I have a picture of one that I'll try and include here in the video to show you what it looks like. Pinch those off, and then you are going to get those, you know, perfectly round, beautiful tomatoes. I'm going to go scour the garden now to see if I can find any. I just wanted to show you an example of what happens when you don't sucker, when a sucker gets away from you. So you can see that this plant has two kind of main stems. This was the original vine. This was a side leaf that I cut off. And this is a sucker that started to grow that got so big and we didn't get to it. And so now this is actually another variety of cherry tomatoes. I think this was Sweet 100s. Yeah, so now I've got two kind of main vines that I'm going to tie to tie up. So I have to come in here and get these suckers here. But the nice thing is it's double the produce. So I think I only planted one or two of these, so that'll be good. But anyways, yeah, so now I'm gonna stake both of these main vines to the stake as it grows. One of the things I forgot to mention was that these are all indeterminate tomato varieties, which means they just keep growing unless you cut the top off. So don't cut the top off when you're suckering. Make sure you identify which is the main vine or the main leader. And if you have determinate varieties, those are going to be more of a bush habit. Those you don't do this to. So only do this to varieties that are going to grow nice and tall. If you are growing indeterminate varieties and you've never tried staking them and suckering them before, give it a try. You can start anytime and see how it goes. Hopefully you have some good success. Thanks for watching. Hope you have a great day and we'll see you next time.